Hello. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to the organizers and for inviting me to be here. I'm really excited to speak with you. First, just a little bit more about me. My name is Mike. I work at a company called Undercurrent in New York. And I should say when the topic of this around workflow and process came up, there's actually a little bit of a running joke inside of Undercurrent that essentially I have a kind of very acute, life-threatening allergy to process. So I thought I was a little bit bemused to get a chance to speak about it. But at the same time, and in particular over the past 6 to 9 months, I've been spending a lot of time working on organizational design, team design, and coaching teams about how they work and helping them transform the way that they work so that they are more nimble, that they are faster, that they are better suited to this digital environment that we live in today. And one of the things that I've learned and appreciated during this process is how fundamental and important process can be to driving that kind of transformation and to getting it to stick. The other thing that I want to do here is that rather than really zooming way down and getting into the kind of nitty-gritty of process, steps 1, 2, 3, and workflow and that kind of thing, I wanted to zoom out a little bit and talk about what needs to change, what's the difference between the ways that we used to work and the ways that we need to work in the future, and why is that the case? And to preface that, one anecdote from a book I read recently, which I highly recommend, The Second Machine Age by Andrew McAfee and Eric Brynjolfsson. There's this great anecdote in it that I think really hammers home the enormity of the change that we're experiencing during our lifetimes right now. So a long, long time ago, the inventor of chess, he was a rural farmer in India, and the king of the land loved this game, chess, so much that he invited the inventor to come to his palace, and he said, "I love this game that you've invented, and I would like to reward you for having invented it. So what can I give you?" And the very clever inventor of chess said, "I'll tell you what we'll do. Just put 1 grain of rice on the first square of the chessboard. On the second square of the chessboard, put 2 grains of rice. Next square, put 4 grains of rice. Next square, 8 grains of rice, and so on." And the kicker is that the numbers get really, really big really fast. But in the first half of the chessboard, the numbers are fathomable. Talking about hundreds of millions, trillions of grains of rice. But once you cross over into the second half of the chessboard, the numbers become completely incomprehensible. And by the time you're on the last square of the chessboard, the king is promising the person who invented chess to give him more grains of rice than have ever existed in the history of humankind. And when you look at just Moore's law and the evolution of the computer chip, so Moore's law says that computing power and basically doubles, and it's basically been happening at a rate of about every 18 months. And if you put the beginning of that timeline around 1958, we crossed over into the second half of the chessboard when it comes to computer chips and computer technology around 2006. And so when we think about this accelerating pace of technological change that we're experiencing very recently, it's not an accident that so much has been happening so quickly. And so when I think about what's to come, when I think about things like artificial intelligence, for instance, I'm really a lot daunted and a lot excited, and I can't. It's hard to even imagine what we're going to be experiencing in the decades ahead. And then I think about this group and the practice and the skill of design. And in this world that we're moving towards, in a world that's going to be more heavily dominated, influenced by digital technology, by computing power, by things like artificial intelligence and software that can either do jobs for us or enhance the way that we do our jobs. I come back to design as one of these very, very, very fundamental skills and practices that is going to be, is more important now than it ever has been, I would argue, in the history of the world. And I think that's only going to get more and more important and even more valuable in the years and decades to come. So with all of that in mind, these are some of the things that when I think about that future and kind of what needs to change, these are the things that I keep coming back to and that I've observed and noticed over the past few years. So one of my earliest memories is my father coming home with the family's first computer, which was a Commodore 64. And I was too young to use it. Yeah, props for Commodore 64. And I was a little bit too young to use it at the time. It was primarily for my older brother. But as soon as I was old enough, I spent countless hours staring at that blue screen. And to be fair, about 60 to 70% of that time was just waiting for things to load. But I remember playing Pong on the Atari. I remember playing Shadowgate on my friend's Apple IIgs. I remember the first time I played Super Mario Brothers. And when I took a typing class in junior high, we learned on the new Macintosh Classic. And when I started college in 1996, the school had just installed Ethernet connections in all of the rooms on campus. So I've had a pretty long relationship with digital technology, and first it was simply as a user and then as a novice developer and designer, and always as a curious observer. And over that time, I've become increasingly obsessed. Like the evolution of technology itself, my interest was slow and incremental at first, and then suddenly fast and boundless. And since understanding this stuff became my job when I joined Undercurrent in 2008, these ideas, these 10 ideas about technology have become lenses and points of view that I return to as I try to make sense of the world, how things are changing, and what can be done. And I should caveat all of this by saying that this is, after all, a digital world, and none of this stuff is etched in stone, but from what I've seen so far, this stuff seems to be true. So, number one, technology is a science, but getting people to use it is an art. In her 2014 TED Talk, Margaret Gold Stewart, director of product design at Facebook, shared that it took the designer over 280 hours to refine the pixels on a redesign of the little like button. Talking about 10 pixels by 50 pixels or about. 280 hours of designing, testing, and iterating in order to perfect a small but vital element of the social web that is seen on average 22 billion times a day across over 7.5 million websites. And when people describe the best way to develop technology products, it often sounds a lot like the scientific method. Hypothesis, test, learn, and this is a great place to start. And when done well and fast, it goes a long way to solving problems that users actually care about. But intelligence and brute logic can only get you so far when your success depends on the behavior of real live human beings. And the difference between promising and legendary depends on intuition, creativity, and taste. The best technology companies in the world find ways to balance these forces. In the early make-or-break days at Pandora, their CTO had the entire company vote on what each of them thought it would, quote, would be stupid for us not to do in the next 90 days. They'd put all the ideas up on the wall, and each person would have their votes. And Pandora is a great example of bringing together computer and human intelligence. The service's uncanny ability to know what its listeners want to hear is the result of machine learning, observing the unfathomably huge data set of user behavior, and real live music experts who help the computers to understand music. And in an increasingly computerized world, it's easy to forget the strange things that make us human and fully appreciate the role of that humanness in how we do or don't interact with technology. We find ourselves surrounded by screens and forget that humans still play a critical role in creating what's on those screens. As Frank Chimera writes in his brilliant essay, what screens want needs to match up with what we want. Number two, our inability to predict the future doesn't make it any less inevitable. In 2004, it was difficult to predict whether Friendster, MySpace, or Facebook would be the most successful. And looking back, it turns out that the true measure of your wisdom wasn't whether or not you bet correctly, but rather whether or not you bet at all. The people who skeptically asked, is this social networking thing really going to stick around, are the ones who got left behind. The other people, call them brave, foolish, or just optimistic, who simply jumped in and started learning are the ones who are leading today. And over again, technology has shown us that it will find its purpose. Just give it time. And here are a few useful questions about technology. Here are a few useful questions to ask about technologically driven change. What is most likely to happen? When will it happen? How will it happen? Who is most likely to be affected when it happens? And on the other hand, the question, will it happen at all, 99% of the time turns out to be a dangerously useless question to ask. History shows us that all of these questions are difficult to answer accurately. The fact that they're all hard to answer, however, doesn't make them all equal. The difference between the first group and that last question, will it happen at all, is that the first group of questions pushes you to imagine what can be. It pushes the people asking the questions towards exploration and action. It inspires critical thinking and creative problem solving. On the other hand, questioning possibility itself provides perilous cover for inaction. It's cheap comfort for those asking the question, allowing them to tell themselves and each other that maybe nothing needs to be done at all. And when I think about this, the image that always springs to mind is that classic video clip of Steve Ballmer in 2007 laughing off the iPhone, saying, oh, it's so ridiculous, it's so overpriced, business people won't use it, et cetera, et cetera. Famous last words. Number 3. Everything can be disrupted. For decades, the automotive industry seemed impenetrable to upstarts. And Tesla barely made it out of the startup phase. But now they've got the safest car ever tested, the best rated car ever by Consumer Reports, and they're blowing all the other auto stocks out of the water. And just because the car business is hard doesn't mean it can't be completely transformed by a software engineer. The Michael Porter-approved walls that you've been carefully building up around your business for the 50 years won't protect you from technological disruption. On an elemental level, digital technology transforms the world of disparate information into a universal language of ones and zeros. And this is why digital technology doesn't respect boundaries. Regardless of the industry, digitization will uncover inefficiencies and create value by enabling information to move more easily. From people, from people to machines, and from machines to machines. And when Google began, they unlocked knowledge trapped in books, libraries, newspapers, and people's brains as it was becoming digitized, and enabled it to be shared and accessed more easily. In line with their stated mission to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful, Google has disrupted knowledge itself. But they didn't stop there. Media companies toppled as advertisers flocked to a new service that provided a more effective method for putting the right message in front of the right person at the right time. Looking ahead, Google's investments in artificial intelligence, robotics, even aerospace should be setting off alarm bells at all kinds of companies that wouldn't have guessed even 1 year ago that they'd find themselves competing head-to-head with Google. After all, aren't they just a search company? Not anymore, and not for long. So number 4, are people using it, is the only question that really matters. The mobile messaging app WhatsApp was launched in 2009 and was acquired by Facebook 5 years later for $19 billion. And that's roughly 1/3 the market cap of Ford Motor Company. Many people were baffled by the size of the deal, and I say look at the number that matters. As of December 2013, WhatsApp had over 400 million active users per month. And the population of the US is around 313 million. And this isn't a new idea. If no one uses your product, you don't have a business. The difference today, however, is how easy it is to find out if anybody wants to use your product before you've gone too far in the wrong direction. Questions about revenue, competition, market strategies, all might be perfectly legitimate, but good answers to any of those questions all hinge on making something that people actually use. And that's why the source of advantage is now speed. How quickly can you find out if you have something people will use? It's no accident that Amazon is one of the most successful companies in the world right now. As noted in Jeff Bezos' 2013 letter to shareholders, which is a perennial must-read in my opinion, Amazon has developed an experimentation platform called Web Lab, on which they're able to run almost 2,000 experiments per year. And this is one of the ways that Amazon is able to quickly pilot and validate new ways to add value to the customer experience. In 2013, they prototyped, validated, and launched a simple solution called Ask an Owner that routes product questions from users considering a purchase to customers who have already purchased the item. And in less than a year since launch, millions of these questions were asked and answered. Unlike Amazon, most big companies only know how to make big bets. And with that baggage weighing them down, they seek certainty in an uncertain world. And well-intentioned executives build a gauntlet of questions intended to ensure success that end up killing innovation. What's the business model? Will this scale? What's the plan for year one? What's the ROI? None of it matters. Your job as a business leader is to answer this question first and fast. Are people using it? Number 5, trying something costs less than not trying anything. In 2009, Jack Dorsey's friend James McElvey, an artisan glassblower, could only accept cash at his studio. The overhead costs and complexity of becoming a credit card merchant were too much trouble for such a small business. Recognizing the user need and the market opportunity, Jack and James went to their local tech shop and a month later had a working prototype of what would eventually become Square, the disruptive payment company now valued at over $8 billion. And everywhere you look, the costs of experimentation are approaching zero. The wide availability of tools, resources, and development frameworks makes the decision to launch a website or mobile application practically a non-issue. The question is no longer can we make it, but rather what should we make? And while this trend has been happening in the world of software for decades, it's now crossing over to the world of hardware too, as the means of production become digitized. When Bree Pettis, the founder of MakerBot, and his friends at NYC Resistor wanted an affordable 3D printer to serve their hardware hacking needs back in 2009, they found that it would be exponentially less expensive to use open source hardware designs, expired patents, and their own crude production facilities to build 3D printers themselves than it would be to buy any of the versions currently available on the market. Now, at the time, the leading manufacturers of 3D printers, companies 3D Systems and Stratasys, only offered professional-grade machines costing a minimum of hundreds of thousands of dollars. 4 years later, Stratasys acquired MakerBot for over $400 million. So looking back, it would have been a lot cheaper for Stratasys just to give Bree and his friends a free printer and probably give Bree a job, and they could have saved themselves $399 million and maybe had gotten the MakerBot themselves before anybody else did. And yet they lack the necessary will or ability or something or foresight to be able to pull that off. And the new reality changes the equation on both sides, for the disruptor as well as those threatened by disruption. The barriers to experimentation have fallen for everyone. Outside large established organizations with little to no industry experience can go from idea to viable solution with a tiny fraction of the time and cost that it would have taken even 10 years ago. But even more importantly, outsiders can pursue those opportunities without decades of institutional bureaucracy and organizational complexity slowing them down. This is why the cost of inaction is so much higher than people think. It's only a matter of time until someone discovers the breakthrough solution that will disrupt your business. And that timeline is shrinking by the day. Companies who want to thrive and grow rather than die of obsolescence must break down internal barriers to experimentation and fight to create environments where new ideas can flourish as easily inside as they can outside. Number 6, you can't change what you do without changing how you do it. Gabe Newell, who's the co-founder and CEO of a company called Valve, a gaming company, said this in an interview with the Washington Post earlier this year. He said, "We had to think about if we're going to be in a business that's changing quickly, how do we avoid institutionalizing one set of production methods in such a way that we can't adapt to what's going to be coming next?" The set of those requirements led to decisions about not having titles, not having organizational structures, and things like that, because as useful as they are in the short term, in the long term, they're really hurting you a lot. This is something that we've been working on at Undercurrent and have really been, has been coming into focus for us this year. I'm going to take a little divergence from the rest of the rest of the talk for a second and kind of dig down into this. So we've been looking at the difference between these, between startups, big and small, little brand new startups, as well as big digital behemoths like Google and Amazon, looking at how do they work differently, how do they operate differently than a lot of our clients who have been around for hundreds of years, like GE or American Express, hundreds of thousands of employees around the world. So these 7 kind of value shifts seem to be some of the most significant drivers of those differences. Number 1, embrace uncertainty. And what this leads to is if you start by accepting that nothing is ever 100% perfect, then you have to operate in a mode where you're always iterating, always improving. And as a designer, sometimes it's easy to fall into that trap where you have this idea in your head about what would be best, what would look best, and also we've been taught for good reason to be scared of, sometimes scared of getting client feedback. I don't want to show this to them too soon because, their feedback is not going to be useful or constructive. So we wait until we think we have it perfect and then we put it in front of them. But the mode that we're moving towards now is always putting new iterations of the design in front of users as frequently as possible and shortening that cycle time as much as possible. Number 2, distribute authority, empowering localized small teams. At Valve, you have you're given 2 things to do when you join the company. Find something to do and go find other people like yourself to come and work here. Very, very distributed. But even in other companies, Medium, Ev Williams' company, has been using a system called holacracy that specifically gives teams a clear purpose, clear set of accountabilities, and then trust them to decide for themselves how to operate, who does what, and what to prioritize at any given time. 3, seek simplicity. Having very, very simple rules to allow productive variation to flourish. Number 4, processing information. One of the biggest pieces in processing information is just this idea of kind of working in public. If you're part of a larger design team, maybe in a larger organization, can you work in a shared environment, maybe in the cloud, maybe Google Docs or whatever it might be, using Dropbox and Box, for instance, to share files as you go, so that another designer working on another team can easily discover something that you're working on and replicate and use it or incorporate it into something that they're working on. We've actually, in our strategy work, have moved to primarily using Google Docs, and very often we'll share the Google Doc with our client when it's still a blank page, and invite them to watch us develop the strategy as it comes together. 5, encourage divergence. So how do you create those spaces where people can be experimental? A classic example of this is Google's 20% time, but you can have a lot of other variations on it as well. But how do you give people both the space and the permission to try out new ways of doing things, new solutions, new things that might be useful for a client or a customer? Number 6, enable crossover. So do you have a system in place where when something works that you can select it and bring it over to another team and make sure that it sticks? And lastly, serve networks. And this is what I'll get more into that in a second. But these are kind of the basic shifts. And on the right-hand side, we just see, if you look at any organization, it kind of breaks down into these kind of operating elements. It's purpose, it's people, its products, its processes, and its platform. And so these value shifts are then applied in different ways across those different aspects of any organization. And so, going back to this notion of you can't change what you do without changing how you do it, take Twitter versus CBS, for example. With over 240 million active users as of last time I counted, Twitter is a global broadcasting platform unlike anything the world has ever seen before. And unsurprisingly, the difference in how Twitter operates as compared to how a legacy media company like CBS operates are profound. Why does Twitter only need 2,700 employees to do what they do, and CBS needs over 20,000? Obviously, CBS is a much larger and more diversified business, and the stock market might even choose CBS over Twitter at the moment. But if you look beyond their income statements, has CBS or Twitter made a bigger impact on our world since Twitter's launch in 2007? Why is it that Twitter is able to make such a relatively huge dent in the universe with its team of 2,700, while CBS is merely able to sustain their business with a team of over 20,000? When Twitter's SVP of engineering joined Twitter in 2012, he recognized that they would need to hold on to a few critical organizational principles if they wanted to maintain their speed and success at scale. A, build strong teams first, assign them problems later. B, keep teams together. C, go modular, remove dependencies. And D, establish a short, regular ship cycle. So going back, it really aligns well to some of the things on here. Small teams, small lean teams, give them autonomy, remove dependencies, and increase that cycle time in order to embrace uncertainty and build in continual learning. And that's just a tiny glimpse of how Twitter and CBS are different. But this difference is representative of a fundamentally different mental model for how to organize and operate a global organization. Spotify, another 21st century global media company, continually reevaluates its operating practices as it seeks to improve its ability to innovate and ship faster than their rivals. In 2012, agile coaches Henrik Nyberg and Anders Ivarsson, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing their name, published a paper called Scaling Agile at Spotify. Fantastic paper. If you haven't seen it before, look it up, which lays out a contemporary approach to organizing people and capabilities in service of user needs. Their elemental team units called squads are designed to feel like and operate like mini startups with the autonomy to ship and learn fast. As Albert Einstein put it so eloquently, one of my all-time favorite quotes, "We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them." And the same thing goes for how we work. You can't use yesterday's way of working to build tomorrow's solutions. Number 7, if you're not designing for networks, you're missing the point. When Google bought the car navigation app Waze 5 years after its founding for $966 million, Google framed the acquisition in terms of users, not technology. This is the quote from Google's press release. "Today we're excited to announce we've closed the acquisition of Waze. The fast-growing community of traffic-obsessed drivers is working together to find the best routes from home to work every day." And here's something special about digital things. They don't get used up when they get used. They don't get used up when they get used. And in economics, things like this are known as non-rival goods, a good whose consumption by one consumer doesn't prevent simultaneous consumption by another consumer. For example, you and I can both read the same Wikipedia article at the same time. We can watch the same streaming movie on Netflix at the same time, listen to the same song on iTunes at the same time, without conflict, without using up each other's stuff. And this makes digital things particularly amenable to network effects when the value of a product increases as more people use it. As more users watch, rate, and upload videos to YouTube, the site gets better for everyone. As more people post and follow each other on Tumblr, the site gets better for everyone. As more people join Facebook, connecting and sharing with each other, the site gets better for everyone. Almost any popular website you can name benefits from network effects in some way. And now, as hardware becomes simply software wrapped in plastic, as Brad Feld likes to say, these same possibilities and expectations can be applied far beyond the bounds of the web browser. When MakerBot was acquired by Stratasys, much of the company's value was actually contained in Thingiverse, MakerBot's community of engineers and hardware hackers. Chris Anderson's company, 3D Robotics, is creating a platform for unmanned aerial vehicles that gets better as more people become users. The software inside Tesla's cars will make the cars smarter over time as more drivers take to the road. If you're the creator of a digital product or service, you can't take this opportunity for granted. Figuring out how users can create value for each other is now a fundamental and critical aspect of building successful products in a digital world. Number 8, innovation is recombinant and speed is the new IP. This is a quote from Sir Tim Berners-Lee talking about the invention of the World Wide Web. He says, "When I say I invented the web, I really just put together the last few pieces out of a construction kit which had already been made. So I was looking at a problem of there being lots and lots of different sorts of systems for keeping information. And there was already hypertext systems, and there was already the internet. The internet had spread across America, and it had just gotten into Europe. So when I was looking at the problem of all these different information systems being incompatible, so you couldn't easily get information from one to the other, I realized that we could make them all look like one big virtual information system just by taking the ideas of hypertext on the one side and then using internet protocols to connect all of the computers. We would make what I would call, for better or worse, the World Wide Web." Very humble, that Sir Tim Berners-Lee. Good, worthwhile ideas are abundant, and there have never been more of them. It's never been easier to find them, and it's never been easier to bring them to life. And it shouldn't be a surprise then that innovation, the act of turning novel ideas into something valuable, has become simultaneously essential and elusive. This dilemma stems from a misconception about the nature of innovation in a digital world. Innovation is not dependent on originality. This means that companies that depend on innovation need to change their approach. Hiding your most brilliant minds away in a high-security research fortress will only hinder your ability to discover and build upon valuable ideas growing outside your walled garden. And on top of that, the real challenge is who can get their ideas in front of real users fastest, who can ship first, so that the creators can observe, gather data, learn, iterate, and integrate more good ideas to make their product better. The community-powered consumer product company, Quirky, isn't successful because of the originality of their ideas. While the products are novel, the company's success comes from how easily and quickly they're able to take all the good ideas that are floating around out there and bring them to life. They've created a platform that enables anyone with a good idea to become an inventor by sharing their idea with the rest of the community and enabling that community to fertilize that seed with thousands of other good ideas. Their process allows them to go from idea to real products on retail shelves in a fraction of the time that it takes more traditional competitors. And this past spring, when their internet-enabled air conditioner, which is a joint venture with GE, became the #1 selling air conditioner on Amazon, it wasn't because no one had ever thought of it before. It was because they were shipping it 90 days after the idea was brought to them. And I can tell you when GE actually saw that 90-day mark hit, it sent shockwaves through their appliances business. It usually takes them years to get a new air conditioner from idea to market. Number 9, you can't escape complexity. As much as we all wish we could, we cannot escape complexity. On August 25th, 1991, a Finnish student posted a humble note to a Usenet news group. He invited people to join his new product that, in his words, was, quote, "just a hobby, won't be big and professional like GNU," unquote. 23 years later, Linux, the open source operating system originally conceived by Linus Torvalds, has evolved into one of the world's most popular operating systems and the preferred system for servers, high security environments, and supercomputers. Linux achieved this success with a large, diverse, and disorganized collection of contributors, free and open access to its source code, and constant iteration and variation on the product. And this is exactly the kind of approach that would have terrified a traditional corporation. Who's in charge? Who's responsible for quality assurance? How are we going to keep track of the bugs? How can we trust that people won't steal it or corrupt it? How will we possibly keep track of who's working on what when? Unlike its most notable competitor, Microsoft Windows, Linux embraced complexity and adaptivity in its development. And since then, other winning operating systems like iOS and Android have found success by creating systems that enable independent contributors to flourish with limited top-down control. Whether it's by design or by accident, organizations of scale can no longer avoid complexity in today's world. As people and increasingly everything else around us becomes connected, the nature of our relationships, both human and machine, become very complex very quickly. And whether we're talking about most of the world's population or a few 100,000 employees of a global corporation, even a small independent company of a few dozen people, the scale of our interconnectedness is simply too much for any human or even group of humans to comprehend. It is literally impossible for anyone to even observe accurately, let alone attempt to control or design from the top down. Like a 21st century Midas, digital technology makes everything it touches complex. In her book, Complexity, A Guided Tour, Melanie Mitchell defines these systems we see springing up around us by the following shared attributes. Number one, complex adaptive behavior, consisting of large networks of individual components, think ants, B cells, neurons, stock buyers, website creators, each typically following relatively simple rules with no central control or leader. It is the collective actions of vast numbers of components that give rise to the complex, hard to predict, and changing pattern of behavior that fascinate us. Number two, signaling and information processing. All these systems produce and use information and signals that both their internal and external environments. And third, adaptation. All these systems adapt. That is, change their behavior to improve their chances of survival or success through learning or evolutionary processes. So our goal should be to maximize these attributes and make them as efficient and effective as possible. Seeking simplicity in the face of complexity is simply a faster route to obsolescence. Rather than figuring out how to fight complexity, we need to figure out how to make it work for our benefit. Rather than seeking to turn a complex system into a simple system, the goal should be to transform the complex system into a complex adaptive system. And lastly, as the Industrial Revolution was defined by radical efficiency in production, the digital revolution is defined by radical efficiency in information transmission. Describing the significance and scale of the changes we're witnessing, Andrew McAfee and Eric Brynjolfsson write in The Second Machine Age, computers and other digital advances are doing for mental power, the ability to use our brains to understand and shape our environments, what the steam engine and its descendants did for muscle power. The scale of the technologically driven changes we're witnessing is more profound than we even realize, and the oxygen fueling this transformative blaze is information. While some say that information wants to be free, I like to think of it more that information wants to flow freely. Imagine information as water and digitization as gravity. And the force of digitization pulls information along, often enabling it to run in unpredictable directions as the information seeks out equilibrium. It must get where it's going, and you have to try really hard to hold it back. Airbnb and Uber are both great examples of this phenomenon in action. Uber set free trapped information about who needs a ride and where they are at any given time, and combines that information in real time with who's offering a ride and where they are. As GPS-enabled phones became prevalent, this information was waiting for someone to put it to good use. Airbnb did something similar with places to stay. Who's got a place, who needs a place? The information was there, it just wasn't flowing very easily to the right place. Each of these companies has proven to be fundamentally destabilizing to the industries in which they operate, in taxis, hotel industries. And I would argue that a lot of the regulatory issues that they're running into actually stem from built-in systems to protect the old models that depend on inefficiencies in how this information is shared. In 2010, then CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt, famously stated that the world was creating as much information every 2 days as it had in the entire time from the dawn of civilization up to 2003. That the world was creating as much information every 2 days as it had in the entire time from the dawn of civilization up until 2003. And since then, that mind-blowing statistic has only multiplied. We are literally generating so much data now that they need to invent a new metric unit beyond the yottabyte, which is previously the largest unit, to adequately quantify the data set. These two aspects of digital information, the amount of information and the ease with which that information is shared, may be the biggest and least appreciated difference between the future and the past. As McAfee and Brynjolfsson describe it, this surge in digitization has had two profound consequences: new ways of acquiring knowledge, in other words, of doing science, and higher rates of innovation. Science is the process of analyzing the observable world and sorting through the data to separate the known from the unknown. Never before has humanity had so much observable data to sort through. And this is where the intelligent machines come in. At the same time that we're beginning to generate data sets that are far beyond human comprehension, we're also making leaps forward in the capabilities of artificial intelligence. And I can't even claim to be a novice in this advanced field, but I do believe that the possibilities shown by projects like Siri, IBM's Watson, Google's self-driving car are giving us a glimpse of a monumental change. And if you don't believe me, refer back to my lesson number 2, which is that our inability to predict the future doesn't make it any less inevitable. So if you're responsible for a business, for an industry that you help customers, clients, and you're wondering where the weaknesses or opportunities lie, look closely at the cracks and crevices for where information is currently trapped and help it to move more freely. And in closing, I just want to reiterate that in light of all of this change, that the practice and the skill of design has never been more important. So I encourage you all to kind of embrace this future, whether we like it or not. And also, one thought about kind of reflecting on my purpose and what I'm trying to do with my career in the face of how we can't possibly predict or know what's ahead. What I think about is that as individuals who have just some glimpse of how this stuff works or what's coming, that if we just have a little bit of that expertise, of that foresight, then we owe it to ourselves and the world around us to be as educated about this stuff as possible, and to just put ourselves in a position where we can hopefully be in the right place at the right time to push some little decision that we don't even know what its potential impact is going to be, but to push that little decision about what to design, who we should design it for, what the product should be, what it should do, to push it, nudge it in the right direction, so that hopefully when we take stock of all this stuff in 100 years, it'll end up having been mostly for the better. Thank you.